does their schedule also allow you 2-3 hours time to watch a Bollywood movie like Brahmastra? If you know where I'm getting at.
We don't want to be lectured. We don't want to be told what to think and what to feel and what to believe and all that. You keep that to yourself. Give us good stories, give good movies.
Speaking of nepotism, King Charles III just took over the reins from Queen Elizabeth.
Nobody in India is actually mourning the death of this individual. And we declared a day of half mast thing and all that on a Sunday when nothing actually affects the nation. Everyone is partying essentially and relaxing. When people think of drug running, we think of Pablo Escobar, Plata o Plomo, right? We think of that.
Yeah.
But Pablo Escobar was a small fry compared to Queen Victoria, who was the biggest and most successful drug runner in history.
Mohammad Ghazni would have been giving him a high five,
Ashirwad.
Very good evening. Welcome back to Sources Say. This is the fourth episode, and I'm really privileged to be joined by Mr. Abhijit Chavda today, sir. A very good evening to you. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and every show that we've done, it's really gone viral, not just because of the content that we do, because obviously the younger audience resonates a lot with you, and you're somehow an educator for many people out there. Um, I don't know if you've addressed this point in your podcast before, because you're always busy addressing a lot of the other queries that come to you during Ask Abhijit, right? How did you get into the YouTube scene? Because if I get this right, you have a lot of hats. You're a historian, you're a theoretical physicist, you're a geopolitical analyst. You also write, and now you're into the YouTube scene. Now, if I could give you an example, and I'm not being disrespectful by any means, if you look at a lot of people who've gone out of relevance, especially in television journalism, it's often a very sly joke that okay, these people will become YouTubers. I personally feel the pain of it, because coming from the younger generation, we already see the future, right? We know that digital platforms are the future, so which is why we've always been invested in these platforms like YouTube. So what was the entry for you, like, why did you get into YouTubing and stuff?
Right. I was an extremely reluctant YouTuber. I have always seen myself as a writer, not as a speaker. Yeah. So I think, for whatever reason, I think in early 2020, I did one episode. I sent out a tweet on Twitter that I'm doing a YouTube show. I will answer your questions. If you have any questions, let me know. So I got a bunch of questions, and I did one episode of Ask Abhijit, the first one, in early 2020. I put one episode out, and it got a few thousand views, etc. It was nice, but then I kind of, I don't know, I did not follow up on that. Then in December 2020, for whatever reason, I put up this video about why Genghis Khan refused to invade India, and that went viral, like significantly viral worldwide. Then again, for a few months, 6 months, 7 months, I did nothing on YouTube. Then I believe, I think it was in 2021 May or June or something, that I thought to myself that people asking me questions all the time, even though I'm not making any new videos. I was getting comments and questions all the time. So I said, let me resume the Ask Abhijit thing, and I started doing that, and it just went. It caught on. I got so many. I was getting thousands of questions every week, and that's how it happened essentially. So I essentially,
Right.
my entire content is driven by the audience. They ask me questions and I answer them, and I have, like you said, three core competencies: science, primarily theoretical physics, science, and
Yeah.
history, which I've always been a student of since I was like 7 years old. And because I understand history to a good extent, that's why I also understand geopolitics, because the foundation of geopolitics is a strong understanding of history. So these are the three core competencies, you could say, I have, and that's how it's gone on thus far.
But it's amazing, because especially because you do live sessions and people are very conscious of what they speak in public off late because of social media. Even if you gaff up a little bit, everybody will be behind your life. And I think you've already experienced that in the last 2-3 years. So, what gives you that confidence? Ki, especially because you're asked a wide range of questions, some really serious, some really weird ones. So, how do you prepare yourself mentally before doing anything?
Um, I don't prepare myself for this. See, I think for a significant time I was invited by various news channels on live telecasts. You know, as a historian, essentially, sometimes as a physicist because of the Chandrayaan thing, and I found myself becoming quite comfortable answering questions live and interacting live. So then I thought, let me do this sort of live streaming thing, because if you the problem is that I am kind of a perfectionist. If I want to record something and edit it, I want to make it as perfect as possible. That's a huge drain of time. You know, I'll try and make it as perfect as possible. But if I do it live, then there's no such. I mean, there's no way of making for me to make something more perfect than what I can do live. So that's why I
Right.
thought, let me go the live route and see how it goes. And I think I just settled into it. Yeah, it is kind of tricky. I mean, you have to be careful that you don't say certain things, but I think I don't have any such feelings that I would want to offend people. So I just be myself. I think anybody can see that I'm just being myself. I'm not being restrained and being careful. I'm just being who I am. So it's that's the approach that I've always had. I have a whole bunch of questions coming in. I simply cannot prepare for that. If I were to prepare the answers beforehand, I would be doing nothing else in my life. So I just take the
Yeah.
questions and I answer them as whatever comes to my mind. I answer, and that's how it's been going.
But as somebody who watches your shows, and I'm sure millions of other people who watch your show, we know what you represent and what you offer to us as audience, right? But why do you think the audience is resonating with you? I ask you this because today we live in an age where anybody can type anything into Google and they'll find their answers. So in that sense, you're that Daisy version of Google who has answers to everything, and obviously you have the right answers, if you know what I mean. So why do you think the audience has resonated with you in spite of that?
Um, I haven't really asked myself this question. Why does the audience resonate with me? First of all, I'm not very serious. Typically, my audience is a younger audience. You know, the people in the teens and 20s, more or less. And when you're at that age, you don't want seriousness, people who will drone on for hours and hours laboring upon a single point. That's what your professors and teachers do in school and college and university. You are sick and tired of that. By the time you're in your early 20s, you want something different. So I resonate with it completely. I do not like people who go on and on. I try to be as concise and straightforward and to the point as possible. And maybe that's that. And maybe it's because I give forth a perspective that others typically thus far haven't seen. I mean, when I speak about history, I speak about history from a global perspective. I've seen the patterns of
Yes.
history happening, and that's why I'm able to uh, essentially tell you what this event means and what are the consequences and so on and so forth. So maybe that's the reason. Maybe it's because I've still not grown up. I'm still a kid in a sense, so I can connect more with the with an audience that is typically significantly younger than mine, younger than me. So maybe these are the points. I've not really done an introspection and analysis of why it's people are watching me, but I'm happy there and I'm very grateful to them.
I should be asking you this towards the end, but I'll ask you now itself. What would your word of advice be for those who are creating content or even generally want to learn something using technology? For a lot of YouTubers, it can apply to people like me. What would your advice be?
My advice would be that, look, you got to try for an extended period of time. You make one video and it doesn't work, you should not give up. And secondly, you have to give yourself some time to get comfortable in front of the camera. It's very strange speaking to a camera. Yeah, it's very strange. It's not something that is natural to any of us. Give yourself some time, make 10, 20 videos and be yourself. It's hard to be yourself initially, but as you settle into it, you will become more comfortable and all that. And also remember that it's not for everybody. I'm sure that everybody is not meant to be
Right.
on camera. Some people have other strengths that like more of writing or analysis or whatever. So find your strengths and give yourself the chance to succeed. Don't give up after 10 videos, 10 episodes of whatever you're doing. Give yourself some time, give yourself a year's time, let's say, and try it. And I'm sure many people will do well if they take this path.
Yeah, it's been about a year since I got into YouTube and started hosting shows and all of that. The first 10, when I revisit right now, it's so embarrassing that I want it hidden away safely in a storage or permanently deleted. It's extremely embarrassing. And it's been a journey. I thought I'll give up. At one point, I was not at all confident, thinking that, yeah, this is not somehow translating because the person that I am off screen is completely different from that who I am when the camera goes live.
Yes,
But yeah, I think it's just a matter of time that people get comfortable on screen, which I am right now, which I think you've personally seen me also in that
yes.
journey. So what are you doing apart from? I know that you're offering courses and you've been really busy, which is why we've had to reschedule this also a couple of times. Apart from your busy schedule, what do you do? People also want to know.
I am just doing this right now. I am for the past many months. I'm fully into content creation. There is a demand for what I'm doing. I mean, people. I mean, if you look at the comments I get, I mean, on the YouTube admin page, there is a section where you can see all the consolidated comments for all the videos on your channel. I am getting thousands of questions per week. There is a demand for this, and I would be remiss if I would not, give the audience what they are seeking. So that's what I'm concentrating on right now. I am doing whatever I'm doing, the live streams every week. I am also creating courses. I've made one course, I'm also working on another course, and I am also trying to figure out what's the future direction that I should take. It's always a thought process that's always going on, because you've got to keep evolving. So that is right now what I'm doing. I'm also writing maybe a couple of books. I don't know how many I'm writing right now, but I'm writing.
Okay.
So it's something that's working in parallel. And so that's it's all creation right now. I'm creating stuff. I'm also serving as a reviewer on a physics journal. I'm not writing papers right now. So there's a whole
Right.
lot on the plate right now. So it's a very busy time. I have to really schedule every half hour of my day properly so that I don't mix things up. But yeah, it's good. It's good. Being busy is always good.
So does this schedule also allow you 2 3 hours time to watch a Bollywood movie like Brahmastra? If you know where I'm getting at, I was
you know
actually hoping you would get there.
uh, I am a huge movie aficionado. I've always, since I was a kid, loved stories, loved storytelling, loved movies. I like all genres of movies. I like thrillers, I like mysteries, I like science fiction, I like fantasy, I like action movies, I like serious historical movies. I like everything. I mean, if I had the time, I would watch at least one movie on the big screen every week. I would do that. When it comes to Bollywood, I can't remember the last time I watched a Bollywood movie. I mean, I used to watch
Why is
Bollywood
that?
movies in the past.
I mean,
I
is it
just
the general reason that everybody gives that probably the quality is deteriorating over the years, and which is why you don't have much interest for it?
it simply doesn't. I simply don't feel the urge to watch these movies anymore. You have the same old actors and actresses, the same few five, six, ten faces that you see over and over again. You don't see any new fresh faces coming in. The themes are the same. The formula, it's all formulaic movies, and there's nothing new. There's nothing that surprises you in Bollywood. And you've seen those old movies. It's all rehashed now. They're remaking old movies with new faces. It's so formulaic, and there is nothing
Yeah,
exciting about it. So that's why I cannot remember the last time. It must have been almost a decade. I must have seen one or two movies here and there by
right.
chance or whatever. But yeah, that's the thing. I really enjoy movies. I really want to see good movies, but nothing's coming out of Bollywood. Nothing that makes me feel like, yeah, I need to go and watch this. So yeah,
Right.
that's where I am vis-a-vis Bollywood. I have nothing against them, but please
Hmm.
make good movies, and please bring in some fresh blood, some new actors and actresses, new talent, which you don't get, unfortunately. Nothing significant.
So this is the debate that's been going on in social media, especially after a few major flops in the
Mhm.
last 1 year, right? On one side, you have a spectrum which says no, this has nothing to do with nepotism or anything else. It simply has to do with probably a bad storyline or something. But there is the other side which says, no, you guys get into too much cancel culture. There's a lot of wokeism, and you have nothing new to offer. And there's a lot of Hindu sentiments which are hurt. So, which side is right about this? What do you attribute the failure for Bollywood today?
What do I attribute the failure of Bollywood to? First of all, there's no freshness. It's the same faces. Like you said, nepotism. That's a big deal. I mean, there is 1.3 billion people in the nation. Don't we can't we imagine seeing some new faces coming in? There's so much talent. You can see it all over the place on Instagram, on Reels, on YouTube. There are so many talented people, but they never make it to the Bollywood stage. So that's one thing. There's nepotism. It's a very close, tight circle, very close club, and people are tired of seeing the same faces. That's one. Secondly, how good is the acting? Nothing to write home about. You have so many really good actors and actresses all across the world. Look at Hollywood. I mean, even Hollywood is kind of going the same way right now, but they do unearth new faces all the time, really good actors and actresses.
Right.
You don't see that. And then the storytelling is I mean, there's nothing new coming in. And also, like you mentioned, there's the cultural angle. They are pushing an agenda. When I watch a movie, I want to be entertained, I want to be surprised, I want to take back something from it. I don't want to be lectured. Stop lecturing me. I don't give a damn what your cultural things are, whatever your inclinations are. I don't need that. And that's the message I think the entire nation is now giving Bollywood. We don't want to be lectured. We don't want to be told what to think and what to feel and what to believe and all that. You keep that to yourself. Give us good stories, good movies. We're not getting that. We are getting lecturing in a variety of ways, that this sort of thing
Yes.
is good. And of course there is this, obviously, this anti-Hindu angle that is a
Mm.
reality. Nobody can deny that. I mean, there are various Twitter handles there are showing the patterns over and over again. It's been
Right.
happening for such a long time. So all of these factors, I think, they are now coming together. And also, now there are so many options. People have so many options for entertainment. There are all the OTT platforms which also have issues, but there are options there. There's YouTube, there's Instagram, there's so much more available. Options empower people, and now people are empowered. Bollywood no longer has the captive audience like Doordarshan used to have in the 1980s and all that. Only one TV channel, you have nothing to do, you got to watch it. Bollywood used to be like that. Now they
Right.
have serious competition from down south, other places, and it's good. It's overall good for the nation. Either they will either have to shape up or ship out.
Yeah. Speaking of nepotism, King Charles III just took over the reins from Queen Elizabeth. And, people in Asia and other former colonies are obviously very offended because the monarchy has been going on and on and on. And since the last 70 years, but the surprising thing is that the monarchy has enjoyed a significant amount of public support in England, in spite of everything that has happened recently. So, why do you think that support is continuing, especially because it's very disappointing when you see India still being a part of the Commonwealth somehow, and you see President Murmu, whose community Birsa Munda comes from, who fought against the British, is going there to offer her condolences. Maybe it's protocol, but how would you see this?
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that we are still a part of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth, I like to call it the losers' club, the nations that were ruled by the British Crown, and in some ways, some of them are actually still under the dominion of the British Crown. So the Commonwealth is a losers' club. The United States was also once ruled by the British Crown, but it is not a member of the Commonwealth. They defeated the British and evicted them physically, forcefully out of North America, which is why they can proudly say that we will not be a member of this losers club. In the case of India, we were handed over power. It was a transfer of power from one set of crooks to another. Essentially, it was not a democratic transfer of power. So yeah, that's why the people who came into power in India elected or chose to keep India part of this club. Now when it comes to the monarchy, the people of England seem to still support the monarchy to a large extent, possibly because it is their own tradition. It is something that continues for see, the current dynasty is descended from William the Conqueror, who was a Norman warlord. He was a
Right.
duke in Normandy. He conquered England in the year 1066. That was the Norman conquest of England. That was the last time England was successfully conquered from outside. And every single king and queen that has sat on the crown of England after then has been a descendant of this one person, William the Conqueror. So it's a lineage, it's a proud tradition they have. And yes, the people were greatly oppressed. It was a feudal system in England, which I'm sure many people know, and yet it is something that is part of the tradition. So I kind of understand whether English people, not the British people but the English people, do hold hold the monarchy in a certain kind of esteem. Had we such a tradition that went back 1,000 years or 5,000 years, then we would also hold it in high esteem, especially when our monarchs were never as oppressive as the British feudal overlords
Yeah.
always were. So I understand that why it is so. Now, when it comes to President Murmu, I think that since we are a member of the Commonwealth and this is simply a diplomatic nicety as gesture, it means nothing for us. Nobody in India is actually mourning the death of this individual, and we declared a day of half mast thing and all that on a Sunday when nothing actually affects the nation. Everyone is partying essentially and relaxing. So we have to understand that we have to do certain diplomatic gestures and niceties which mean nothing. The people have to
Right.
understand that this really means nothing. And I think it's a good excursion for President Murmu. I think it may be her first visit out of India, so it's good. So it's just a diplomatic measure. It doesn't mean that we are abasing ourselves or bowing down in front of the British monarchy. It's just something that will eventually be discarded by 2047. That is a
Right.
guarantee.
Is this the reason why they're probably? I mean, there are accusations against the monarchy, especially Queen Elizabeth the second, that she was racist and with and she had opposed marriage of Kate Middleton and Meghan Markle at the same time. So, is this one of the reasons that they want to keep that genetic connections within certain royal families and don't want to diversify that outside of that or something?
If we look at the various royal families of Europe, there are lots of monarchies that still exist in Europe. People may not perhaps know about this. So, if you look at all the royal families of Europe, they are all very closely interrelated. They have a lot of inbreeding. There have been lots of cases of inbreeding in the various European royal families, and they are all cousins and uncles and aunts of each other. Now, when it comes to maintaining royal purity, I think that is no longer a thing today. It is not possible. It's not feasible. The rule, as far as I know, is that there is a certain line of succession to the British crown. So there is the person who is currently holding the crown, which is now it is this fellow Charles III, right? He is the current king, and then there is a line of succession. The first in line, the second in line for the throne, the third in line, and so on. So the top six, the rule is that the top six who are in the line for the throne, whenever they get married, they have to take permission from the king or the queen, whoever is in power right now. And then there is a royal assent that is given or maybe not given, and that's how it's done. The other lower claimants to the throne, like number seven onwards, they don't need to do that. I don't think that the royal family can now afford to be overtly racist like that, which is why possibly the queen gave assent to Prince
Yeah.
Harry, to marry this lady Meghan Markle, who has a little bit of African ancestry, I suppose. So now that thing is so now you could have
Correct.
mixed race royals possibly in the UK, which I'm least interested in. Whatever they do is their business. They can, it's fine. So, but the question about racism and all that, that's always been a theme in the West. That's always been the undercurrent in society. It's kind of the structure that's held society
Right.
together in the West. Uh, the West has always had this sense of superiority in the past 500 years because they've been able to overrun and conquer the world and plunder it and pillage it. So they have had this sense or this belief that we having white skin are superior to those who have darker skin because they've won in the past 500 years. And if you look at all the prosperity of the West, it has come from plunder and pillage. The Queen's ancestors did that. Queen Victoria, her great grandmother, if I'm not mistaken, great great grandmother, whatever it is, people can look it up. Queen Victoria was the Empress of India after 1857. She assumed the actual title of Empress of India, and there we know what happened to India. I mean, they if you look at the death toll during British occupation and all the hundreds of artificially induced famines they created, the death toll would have been well in excess of 100 million Indians over 2.5 3 centuries. Just in the aftermath of 1857, they at least 10 million Indians died. Even the British, the Guardian and the BBC have reported on this, and the amount of treasure they stole from India is in excess of $45 trillion. I think even that is a conservative estimate, and so on. So this was all done by King Charles's ancestors, the Queen's ancestors. If you look at Queen Victoria,
Right.
when people think of drug running, we think of Pablo Escobar, Plata o Plomo, right? We think of that.
Yeah.
But Pablo Escobar was a small little minnow, small fry compared to Queen Victoria, who was the biggest and most successful drug runner in history. What they would do is they would force Indian farmers to, instead of farming food crops, they would be forced to farm to raise crops of opium and all that, and then that opium would be harvested stored in warehouses and then shipped to China. And the Chinese
Right.
would be forced to give the British gold and silver in exchange for this opium. So that was a doubly devastating thing for the Chinese. That led to the various opium wars in the middle of the 19th century, and that's what the Chinese call the century of humiliation, and so on. So these are the things these people have done. Victoria was one of the greatest and worst tyrants in world history. The number of deaths she would have caused in India are, I mean, we nobody has even bothered to calculate that. And then you have the various things that Elizabeth II herself oversaw. So it was under her
Hmm.
supervision that the horrific atrocities happened in East Africa. The Mau Mau rebellion was crushed brutally.
Right.
More than a million innocent African men, women, and children were placed in concentration camps. Their only fault was to demand an end to colonialism and freedom for themselves. Right? This was all done under the direct authority of Queen Elizabeth II. The 1956 Suez Crisis, when Britain invaded Egypt, was again done under the supervision of Queen Elizabeth II. All the atrocities in Ireland during the troubles, during the British occupation of Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland, that also happened under the authority of Queen Victoria II. And there are so many other examples that I will not go into right now because it will become tedious. But Queen Elizabeth II herself continued the same legacy, and she had the same ambitions and the same outlook as her ancestors, the same white supremacy, the same imperialist ambitions, colonialism and racism, and all that, a complete
Yeah.
assent to doing genocide. So this is the legacy of the British crown. It's bathed in blood. No matter how you portray that lady, like an elderly nice grandmother, no, she was not that.
Well, the Irish were having a field day when she actually passed away.
Huh.
Everybody was celebrating. Twitter was on
Hmm.
fire, and and usually there's a huge PR machinery also which works for the royal family. Which some argue that that's one of the main reasons why they've been relevant so far, even after uh, decolonization per se. And that you can see with King Charles III as well, where as soon as he assumed power, there were a lot of these videos which said, "Oh, he's one of the funniest," and I watched them. It was actually not funny. They were very offensive, very racist. And I was just wondering, what did Diana actually see in this man? And then I got my answers. But in spite of all of that, we've moved on as a country. It's been 75 years. We are celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. What, according to you, do you think as a nation we got right? And what do you think are the misses?
What we what did see, first of all, we have to understand that 1947 was dominion status, and when India became a republic, was it 1950, 51? I don't remember the date, whatever it is. That's when India actually became supposedly independent. Now if you look at the transfer of power, it was just a transfer of power from one set of individuals, from a set of oppressors, to their hand-picked successors who are Indians, right? If you look at the Constituent Assembly, it did not represent the people of India. Less than 13% of India's population, eligible population, was allowed to vote in the elections that gave birth to the Constituent Assembly. So it did not represent the people of India and the will of the people of India. Secondly, there are many selected people in the Constituent Assembly. So the Constitution was framed by these individuals who did not represent the will of the people of India. The Constitution was created, they wrote "We the people" and all that nonsense, and then the Constitution was never allowed to be ratified. When you create a new Constitution, you have to put it to a vote to the people of India. Do you accept this Constitution or do you reject it? That's called democracy. This never happened. The Constitution is still unratified by the people of India, and we are taught over generations, generation after generation, that this is all the right way to go about it, and nobody even imagines that this is not the right way to do. I mean, the entire process was completely undemocratic. The first prime minister of India was again selected. He was not elected by anybody, right? Mr. Nehru, he was selected by Mr. Gandhi. Mr. Gandhi
Yeah.
arm twisted the Congress into selecting Mr. Nehru instead of Mr. Patel. So the entire process,
Hmm.
the birth of the modern Republic of India, was totally undemocratic. People don't realize it. And whenever I say this, I get a whole lot of love from people. What do you mean? I mean the opposite of that, you know. But yeah, that's the thing. So we got all that wrong. And
Hmm.
then we had the Nehruvian rate of growth, the Nehruvian regime, 2%, 3% per year. A nation that was that broken down, with a life expectancy of what, 28, 32, whatever it was, and the economy was totally destroyed. That nation should have rebounded very rapidly. Look at how Japan rebounded under US occupation after 1945, after it was totally destroyed and devastated. Two atomic tests were done on the Japanese people, and yet Japan was able to rebound from that, despite being, even until today, under the US occupation, and so on. Look at how Korea was able to rebound after the Korean War, right? Again, under US occupation. India was free. India was not under anyone's occupation, and yet we were placed deliberately under this Nehruvian regime, this Nehruvian rate of growth, the red tape, the license Raj, everything that went wrong. It's only when India nearly went bankrupt in 1991 that the economy was opened up, and it was opened up on the terms of the West, the World Bank, the IMF, all that, which compromised India internally very deeply, and we are still compromised by these matters, which it's a whole different story. So we got so much wrong. I think what went right is 2014. We finally elected a government that is nationalist. I think that's where things change, and I hope it stays on that path.
You were talking about the constitution not being ratified, but if you were to give the other side a benefit of the doubt and say that, because the argument is usually that, oh, they wanted to avoid majoritarianism, and that can be actually illustrated through a lot of writings that Nehru actually wrote initially. But one would actually question, why would you oppose the rebuilding of, say, the Somnath Mandir, where even Dr. Rajendra Prasad was there, Sardar Vallabhai Patel was there. So why was there a stark division within the Congress at that point of time?
Look, when you say that you want to avoid majoritarianism, you're essentially saying you want to avoid democracy, because democracy is about the will of the majority. That's simply how it works. You can't say I support democracy but I oppose majoritarianism. It simply doesn't work. That's oil and water. It's not compatible. So people who claim that they are against majoritarianism are essentially fascists who oppose democracy. Let's be clear about that. Now, when it comes to Mr. Nehru, he was an Anglophile. I mean, I don't know what his I don't think he had any connect with India's civilizational values and cultural values. I don't think he had any connect with that. He saw himself as an outsider through an outsider's eyes. He was an Anglophilic person. He was deeply enamored with England in a variety of ways, and he was also a Fabian socialist, which is the worst form of socialism. If you look at the USSR socialism, it was all about building the nation. It was all about industrializing and making the nation powerful, and it worked spectacularly for some time. The USSR was nearly destroyed in World War II, but within a few years they were a superpower. That's an incredible leap
Right.
forward, right? The same socialism, if you convert it into Fabian socialism, which is slowly socialism, that gives you the Nehruvian rate of growth. So Mr. Nehru imported all these external non-Indian ideas into India, forced them down the throat of the nation, and we lost 7 decades nearly. I don't know how many decades we lost, at least 4 5 decades as a consequence of this, until the 1990s. And after the 1990s, again, like I said, we were compromised because of the infiltration of the IMF and the World Bank. Now, when it comes to Somnath, it's very. I mean, if you, I've read excerpts of that wonderful book that he wrote. What's it called? A Discovery of India. I mean, he was discovering India through that book, apparently. So he said that
Yeah.
he found temples very oppressive and very dark, and I don't know what he wrote about it. There are some quotations that I don't have right now, but he said that he found temples oppressive and he did not find them, pleasant to experience and all that. So that tells you, and he was talking about temples in the southern part of India, where you still have some great temples. In the north there's nothing left, but in the south you still have some great temples left, and he was talking about those temples that they gave him a feeling of negativity or something like that, to that extent, to that
Right.
effect. That's what I wrote. And similarly, that's why I'm not surprised to read that he was very strongly opposed to the reconstruction of the Somnath temple, which
Okay.
that is a very ancient, very holy spot, that a temple has stood there for thousands of years. It is said that even Lord Krishna, when he was ruling Mathura, when he was ruling Dwarka, he himself
Yeah.
visited the ancient Somnath temple at that time. That's several thousand years before today. So a temple
Right.
has always stood at that spot for thousands of years. It's one of the most sacred spots in the entire Indian subcontinent, and it's just natural that we should rebuild a temple there, which was destroyed by foreign invaders. So I mean, it's so strange that India's leader would oppose that, and he would try to prevent the president, etc., from going to the opening of the temple. But yeah, that tells you everything you need to know about Mr. Nehru.
Mohammad Ghazni would have been giving him a high five, very
Ashirwad,
happily.
Ashirwad.
So let me bring your attention to far away a conflict that's happening very silently today, the Ukraine conflict. I think
Hmm.
all of us got it wrong because we obviously thought that Russia would have an upper hand, and now you suddenly see the Ukrainians actually fighting back. How do you see this going, sir, in the future?
I would like to examine this conflict from a long term perspective. If you look at it from a day to day to week perspective, you're gonna get. If I do that, I'm gonna get it wrong. So right now there are reports coming out all over the media that the Ukrainians are conducting various offensives and the Russians are falling back. How far can we trust the Western media when it comes to these news reports? From day one, we have seen that they've been trying to spin the entire matter, to twist the entire matter, and to mislead the world. Eh, That's what's been happening since day one. We see all these various think tanks and their various employees on Twitter who put out this very strongly spun version of the events, that it's all Russia's fault. It is Russia that started this war without any provocation, blah blah blah. And what happened in 2016, the Maidan coup, which the US instigated, completely undemocratic and unconstitutional, that is conveniently forgotten. They have been trying to spin this narrative from day one. You simply cannot rely on the Western media, on the English speaking media, because the Indian media also parrots the Western media word by word, word to word. If you watch, you can see various, there are certain Indian media outlets, news channels or whatever, that do cover geopolitical matters. There must be two or three. They all cover it from the Ukrainian and Western perspective. You will see the
Yes,
reporters on the ground in Ukraine. You will see nobody on the ground in Russia. The Russians will welcome Indian reporters. I can guarantee that. But no
right.
Indian reporter goes on the ground in the Donbass region in Russian territory and reports from there what's happening. So you see a very clear one-sided coverage of what's happening. So right now I am seeing indeed reports in the Western media and BBC, CNN, Twitter, all over the place, etc., that the Ukrainians are doing well. They are conducting offensives, and the Russians are falling back and they are losing. They've been losing since day one. But what happened? Look at the map. Look at the map of the Russian advance. So that's what's happening. So I am going to bide my time. I'm not going to comment about what's happening or not happening right now, because really don't know. It's only after a few weeks of elapse that we'll really know who's where. So right now, I
Right.
don't know. I simply do not
No,
trust the Western
makes
media.
sense. Yeah. No, this goes to show that information warfare and psychological warfare is extremely important as a theater, and especially for a rising force like India, right? I mean, China has been. We may laugh at South China Post or other CGTN and all of the reportage when we look at it, but they're actually very very good at it with Confucius Institutes and what they're doing. Uh, and we have a culture in India where in the strategic culture we don't really reveal a lot of things. Things are done very silently, and that somehow has been the Indian approach for so long. So how do we stand in terms of that, sir, in terms of information and psychological warfare, and what do we need to do going forward?
I think the Chinese, they understand the value of propaganda very well. The West also understands it. The West has the upper hand in propaganda because they own all the social media platforms, and they can ban whoever they like. They can amplify whatever narrative they would like to amplify. They can do that. The Chinese have been very very smart in becoming a part of the social media landscape, even though social media, Western social media, is banned in China. But they are all over Twitter, all over the YouTube, etc., all the places. They also have various people who speak on their behalf in the West, who may be living in the West, but all that. So they have created a very strong infrastructure by which they can also transmit their message, their narrative, their propaganda. And everything you see in the media today is essentially propaganda. All media companies and outlets are owned by somebody, and who owns that, that's what you have to see, and what are their agendas that you have to see. So all news is today flavored. There is no unflavored news today anymore. And that's what the Chinese have been excelling at, and the US has been doing that as well. They've essentially kind of evicted Russia from most social media platforms, so you don't see the Russian version anymore. The question is, where's the Indian version? We have a few news channels that do talk about geopolitics, but they simply parrot the Western perspective. There is no Indian perspective being put out anywhere, and this is where India is very
Yeah.
severely lacking. India doesn't have a CCTV. India doesn't have a global times. India
But
doesn't
why do
have
you
the
think
India's
I'm
industry.
sorry to interrupt. Why do you think we've failed so far? Because it's been 10, 15, almost 10 years since the government has changed. And like you said, it's a nationalistic government. And it's not that there is a dearth of resources or talent in a country like India. But still, even after 8 years, 9 years, you still see Indians saying that, on this front, especially, we are still lagging behind. What do you attribute the failure to?
I do not know, to be very honest. The government does have the resources to take this up. Even if you look at the Ministry of External Affairs, they have a once, if I am not mistaken, they have a once in a week media briefing. The Chinese, the Americans, they have daily briefings from all their ministries. Why are we so laggard in this? Why can't we have daily news briefings in which we speak about important matters that are happening all over the world? We have to give our perspective. We are not doing that. And if you look at the tone and tenor of the Indian spokespeople, they are so soft and gentle, and which is okay, which is fine. The style is a question for the government to address. But yes, I simply don't know why India is taking no initiative in this. It is something that greatly disappoints me. Like you said, it's been 8 years, and we have not created our own media mouthpiece. We should have multiple media mouthpieces that do put forth the Indian perspective globally. That has to happen. The French have it, the Germans have it, the Americans obviously have it, the British have it, the Chinese have it, even the Japanese and Koreans have their own Yonhap and whatever the Japanese have, right? They have these things. Even the Russians have it. India lacks these things, and I simply don't understand why India has not invested in this. It's important we do
Yeah.
it.
You may have come across this very scary video, unfortunate video from a Taco Bell in America, where this Khalistani person or person who was extremely Hindu-phobic or in that sense was abusing this man, and he was victimized there. He was abusing his religion. He called him a piss drinker and things like that, which are extremely derogatory to anybody from the Hindu faith. So there has been this entire narrative going on that Hinduphobia is real. If Islamophobia can be real, if Sinophobia can be real, Hinduphobia is also real. Um, First of all, this is a two-layered question. One, do you actually think that there is Hinduphobia? Because the other side, the left, says that no, you're too big a population for there to be any phobia at all, because you're over 1.5 billion people, so you can't play the victim here. And secondly, do you attribute this to perhaps India growing as a power? Because usually you see these phobias being associated with any power that's rising, right? And then you have a popular uprising, or you see these people from a particular region being victimized as a result of that.
Right. So I haven't seen the video which you're mentioning, but anybody who says that Hinduphobia is not real is Hinduphobic. Hinduphobia is a very big deal. It's a very real thing. You see it everywhere, especially in the West. The US academia is systematically fostering Hinduphobia. They are portraying Hinduism and the various dharmic paths as primitive, as backward, as misogynistic, as patriarchal, everything, anything bad you can think about it, and any bad adjective that you can think of, they are heaping that upon Hinduism in a variety of ways, in a very sterile academic way. Like they talk about caste, and they talk about the fact that apparently in the US there is caste discrimination and so on. So they are, through these indirect means, painting Hinduism as a very evil, oppressive, misogynistic, barbaric, primitive, so on, so forth, culture and religion. It's being done systematically and deliberately. And anybody who, like I said, there are various academics who go on Twitter, who are on Twitter, and they say Hinduphobia is not a thing. Hinduphobia cannot be a thing, and all that. They are the biggest Hinduphobes. So there's a ground that's being prepared to attack India from the cultural perspective, from the religious perspective in the West. That is, in the very, it's a project that's been ongoing since the British Raj, since the East India Company days. Initially, when the British first came to India, they wrote very positive reports and positive narratives about what they saw in India from the cultural perspective. They said that Indians have the best family values, far better than anybody in the West, and so on and so forth. But then the
Right.
missionaries got involved, despite the protestations of the East India Company, and then the entire narrative changed. Suddenly, sati became a thing. Suddenly, overnight in Bengal, millions of sati cases started emerging out of nowhere per year. Until the previous year, there was nothing, and so on. So this is a movement that has started that was started in the East India Company days. Atrocity literature, atrocity narratives, and so on. And this is something that has now become part of the mainstream consciousness. You go to the West, people actually believe that Indians are like that. Indians sacrifice the newborn children to the Ganga, for instance. That in the Rath Yatra, hundreds of people are crushed under the wheels of the Jagannath chariot. These narratives started during the missionary days of the East India Company, and people still believe that. And that is something that these Western academics can build upon. They can build upon, build
Yeah,
upon, build upon. That's what's happening. So Hinduphobia is a very real thing. It is, and like you said, the other part of the question, India is now rising. That is an unmistakable fact, right? India is now
right,
rising. As you rise, others will get jealous of you. There will be jealousy. There will be people who resent the fact that they were once in the for 500 years they were ruling the world,
right.
and now the East is rising, India is rising. India is now rising better than China. India's growth rate of growth is better than China. By 2025-26, if the current rate of growth continues, we'll cross the 5 trillion mark. By 2012 13, sorry, 2030 to 2033 or so, we could cross the $10 trillion mark. We are on track for those milestones.
Right.
And that is something that greatly discomfits the West, especially the English speaking world. The Anglo-Saxon empire, they resent it very greatly. They have ruled the world for 500 years through pillage and genocide. What does the UK produce? Why does it have such a high you know prosperity? What have they done?
Yes.
What does the nation produce per year? Where does the GDP come from? They produce nothing, and yet they are so prosperous. All these Western nations produce very little. They don't have the resources to produce much, and yet they are so incredibly prosperous. Now nobody is going to allow them to plunder anymore, and that's why the West is declining, and that's why the jealousy is rising, especially when India starts rising. Now India is rising, and
Right.
you're going to see more and more of Hinduphobia now because of this rise of India.
Hmm. Does this also, point to a problem that's internally there in India? Because with the Macaulayan education system that we've had over the years, we've failed to reform it somehow. And sure, some people attribute the problems with public universities. If you look at the JNU incident that happened a few years ago, continuously it's in the news for some reason or the other. But it's not the case, right? You look at some of the most poshest and the most elite private universities in India, and they're as radically left as a JNU or any other university in India. So that does this mean that we need a complete overhaul of our education system?
Nothing short of a complete overhaul will truly make a difference. What's the purpose of the education system? It's to produce confident young adults who can make a difference in the world and take the world and the nation essentially in the right direction. Does the education system do that? No. It produces diffident, confused, and underconfident young adults who are clueless, who don't have any skills. The only skill you learn, no matter what stream or field you go into, the only skill you learn is how to pass exams. And who is supposed to be the stakeholder in the education system? It's the student who's supposed to be the stakeholder. But look at the actual stakeholders. It is the employees who are the stakeholders. The education system has been turned into an industry. Ask yourself the simple question: if a teacher misbehaves with students, what are the consequences? And if a student misbehaves with teachers, what are the consequences? Who gets the shorter end of the stick? It's always the student, never the teacher. That tells you who the real stakeholders are, who the system
Right.
protects. No matter which university, school, college, which state of India you go to, it's just the same. So the education
Hmm.
system is deeply, deeply obsolete. It's a completely colonial system. Yeah, they offer you MBS today, they teach you computer science and whatnot, but it's the same colonial system that's still continuing. You're not learning any new skills. And of
Right.
course, you also have the brainwashing that ensues from standard one onwards, from nursery onwards. You
Hmm.
are taught all the colonial lies and tropes. Yes, Indian kids are not taught what happened to India in the past 1000 years. The absolute horrors that the country has experienced, not even 1% of that is taught. And that's why Indians think that everything that's wrong in India is their own fault. Let's think of it this
Yes.
way. Everybody is brought up to believe that this is all your fault. All the slums that you see outside, all the corruption, everything that's wrong in the country, it's the fault of the people of India. Let me ask you a simple question. We know that Steve Jobs created Apple computer, the Apple company, somewhere in the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s,
Right.
somewhere around there. Yes. And
Yeah.
he produced, through under his leadership, these wonderful computers, personal computers. It's the first time the personal computing came into the realm of the ordinary people. Before that, ordinary
Right.
people had no access to computers. So he produced these wonderful products. Then there was an internal coup in the company, Apple company, and he was ousted. For close to a decade, roughly, he was not part of the company. And the new leadership ran the company nearly into the ground. Right, it started doing it, eventually ended up doing very badly. None of its products were selling. It was on the verge of bankruptcy. It was almost destroyed. Now, here's the question: whose fault was it that the company fortunes nosedived and the company nearly went bankrupt? Was it the fault of the employees or the leadership, the management? Clearly it's the management that destroyed the company. So in the past 1000 years, all kinds of problems happen in India. Whose fault was it? Was it the employees, the citizens, or was it the leadership, those who were ruling the country? We Indians are taught to
Yeah.
blame the employees. We Indians are taught to blame the victim and not the oppressor and the perpetrator. Everything
Mm.
went wrong in the past 1000. Lots of social issues emerged. Society was not allowed to perform and function the way it would have functioned when it was free. And all kinds of social ills and evils crept into society over a period of 1 millennium. Who's responsible? Is it the
Yeah.
employees or is it the management? People don't think this
Mm.
way. We are not taught to think this way. We are not taught to think. We are taught to memorize and obey. So there are massive problems in the education system. All these little cosmetic changes will make no difference. We need a complete overhaul.
No, this is one of the reason why the younger generation is much more underconfident and are not confident in themselves. Basically, I think it's a person. It translates into a personal story as well. Because I remember growing up as a child, my parents used to tell me that in their generation and their fathers and mothers, they've seen wars, they've seen droughts, they've seen all kinds of crises, and they've actually evolved through it. So there is a generational comfort that is passed on. Like my grandparents worked really hard to just get the basics of it, and my parents worked hard to just get make sure that we're a middle class family, that we're doing well. And now I'm comfortably settled because of that. So which is why, apart from the pandemic, which most of us watched Netflix and we were comfortable, sitting at home, many people actually just this was the first time that people actually saw something as a crisis in their life, that they thought, okay, this is something that our former generations would have gone through as well. And now you see a very volatile Pakistan and China at the border, and you see no progress in terms of achieving peace with them. What do you think holds for our future, and what message would you give to the younger generation going ahead in order to make ourselves more confident?
Okay, let me first talk about the younger generation. I would say that youngsters need to make themselves uncomfortable. They need to learn skills. They need to learn skills that you can use in the real world. Yeah, make yourself uncomfortable. Stay uncomfortable. Take risks. So that's what I would say. And learn things. Be a lifelong student. I know that when you go through 20 years of education, you become deeply allergic to learning anything after that. You want to be free of that. But life has to be a lifelong process, a lifelong journey of learning. Don't stop learning. Take risks. Take chances. Try to create something. Try to give more to society than you take from society. Yeah, so that's what I would say to the younger generation. When it comes to the future outlook for India, we have a hostile Pakistan, we have a hostile China. Pakistan is not the problem. Pakistan is a symptom of a bigger problem. For the past 70 or so years, the Americans financed and funded Pakistan. Pakistan was the attack dog first of the British. They created Pakistan in order to keep bleeding India, to keep India off balance. And then after the British Empire declined in 1956 onwards, the Americans took over, and Pakistan became America's proxy to bleed India. So the Americans financed Pakistani terrorism in India for several decades until the first decade of the 21st century. Then, once Pakistan no longer had any utility for the Americans, the Chinese took over. Now, Pakistan is China's attack dog. And as long as these foreign powers need Pakistan as a stick to beat India with, Pakistan will remain relevant. But Pakistan in itself is not the problem. The real problem is elsewhere. It is the larger power that is using Pakistan as a stick to beat India with. So, um, so that's the deal with Pakistan. Now, the real enemy for India, well, it's not just one enemy. It has India has multiple enemies. First of all, we have China. China has never been a neighbor of India's until the early 1950s, when they
Yeah.
illegally invaded and annexed Tibet. So that is something that needs to be resolved. The key to the resolution of India-China problems is Tibet. Tibet has to be free again. That's not something we'll be able to achieve in the next week, next month, next year, but it's something that has to be something. It is something we need to achieve in the long run, maybe the next 20 or 30 years. Tibet needs to be free. Tibet needs to be freed of the Chinese yoke. Then we will have peace on the northern borders, right? We are growing. The Chinese are not growing that fast anymore. It's a process. So we need to ensure that we keep growing for the next 20 years. If we have a generation, 20 years of 8% plus growth, we will be at that stage of the economy where nobody will even dare to think about trying to mess with us, because as your economy grows, your hard power also grows, which is your military power. If my GDP annual GDP is $3 trillion, I can have a certain amount of that allocated to military expenditure. But if it is
Correct.
$30 trillion, I can allocate 10 times more money to the military. So as your GDP grows, your military strength also grows. We have to work very hard. We have to hide our capabilities and bide our time, like Deng Xiaoping said. So that's what India needs to do. India has multiple enemies. Even the West doesn't want India to rise. The Americans have already made a big mistake by aiding and abetting the rise of China. They're now seeing the consequences. They do not want to make the same mistake with India, which is why they are again opening the old 20th century Cold War playbook, and they are financing the Pakistani military again. They recently announced a $450 million upgrade package for Pakistani F-16s, which directly impacts India's national security.
Package. Yeah.
No matter what India does, India doesn't do anything that directly affects the US national security. But when the US does something like this, it is a hostile act, it is an unfriendly act, it is something that directly compromises India's national security. So that tells you that we have more enemies than only China. The US does not want India to rise beyond where it is already today. So there are
Right.
problems. Xi Jinping has to be re-elected, reselected, whatever, at the end of this year, to as for his next 5 year term as the emperor of China. And right now the Chinese economy is not doing well. China is in the doldrums, so he may look for a quick military victory somewhere. He may be tempted to look for a quick military victory somewhere, and Taiwan may be out of the question, so maybe he will look eastwards towards India. So India has to be aware of that. And if the Chinese, let's say hypothetically, a hypothetical scenario, the Chinese succeed in a sharp war to humiliate India, it would be great for them, because that could cause the current government to lose the 2024 elections, which would be great for China, because a weak government will come to
Right.
power. Even the Americans would like that to happen, because they also don't want India to do well. So the Chinese and Americans, when it comes to India, they are on the same page. So these are the challenges India is facing. But if India keeps on growing at 8%, 10% per year for the next 20 years, India will be unstoppable and untouchable. So the trick for India, the trick is to achieve somehow 20 years of peace, no major conflict. And that's going to take some doing, because we have enemies all around us. But if we can
Yeah.
do that, then we are free.
Abhijit sir, thank you so much for giving us your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. It's been really fun talking to you once again, and I'm really glad we could connect after a long time.
Absolutely. Very nice talking to you. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Thank you so much, viewers. Please do let us know what you thought about this particular episode. And this is personally very special for me because I really enjoyed talking to Mr. Chavda. Thank you so much for tuning in, and do leave your thoughts in the comment section below. This is your host, Sharan, signing off once again.